Back in 1982, the world received its first adaptation based around a video game. Decades later, we have had hundreds of video games adapted, but there has been one video game franchise that has eluded us. It debuted in 1986, over 35 years ago, and spans over 19 titles. More if you include the spin-offs and CDI games. And now that Nintendo has partnered with Universal Pictures to make a Super Mario Bros. Movie, I think it's time we talk about the other Nintendo franchise that its fans love the most. The Legend of Zelda. Hey everybody, it's Kevra. Oh, that's me. I'm Kevra. Hey. And if you're watching this video, it means you also love The Legend of Zelda. You've probably dreamt about what a Legend of Zelda movie or TV show would look like. You might have even had lots of long, fun, dorky discussions with your friends or random strangers on the internet about which game should be adapted, or what a brand new Zelda story could look like. Or maybe you've just gotten excited talking about what it would be like to see some of your favorite moments from the games in a TV series or a movie. If you're not one of those people, maybe you're here because you dread the idea of The Legend of Zelda getting adapted. You believe that any and all video game adaptations are bad, and that if they try to adapt The Legend of Zelda again, not only will it be as bad as that 80s cartoon, but it will single-handedly destroy the entire franchise, and you will never be able to enjoy playing a Zelda game ever again. Dark. You're welcome here too, man. Come on in. Now, I have to admit, I was kind of surprised to see that there aren't a lot of videos on this topic. And the very few videos that are out there are, for the most part, pretty bad. They either talk about the bullshit like casting, or picking the director to helm the project, or it comes from gamers who don't seem to know screenplay format because they talk about very surface level things like, dude, Majora's Mask would be perfect to adapt because of its creepy tone. Like you get the moon staring down at you, just grimacing. You got the Skull Kid on top of the clock tower just doing that like Thriller dance or whatever he's doing. Like it would be so like creepy and unsettling if you did like a 6-episode series, and that's why it'd be perfect. However, those people don't seem to realize that Majora's Mask would be one of the hardest games to adapt because it has time travel, a couple of dozen masks that have unique powers, 4 of which that transform Link, 4 plagued lands, 3 of which basically have the same problem of environmental crisis, a moon that's 3 days away from crashing into the planet, and the fact that it's a sequel to a game that established who the main character is and where he came from. I also hear people say, dude, they gotta do a movie version of Ocarina of Time. Not just the best Zelda game ever, but probably the best video game ever. I mean, when Link got trapped in the Sacred Realm for 7 years, that shit blew my mind when I was 10 years old. So you gotta do like a big movie version of that. But that's not gonna have a big impact on an audience if it happens to Link halfway through a movie because the audience will have only spent an hour with him. And I haven't seen any videos that even attempt to talk about the idea of creating a brand new story which has entirely different obstacles. Regardless of the obstacles it faces, I do think you can adapt The Legend of Zelda, but the style of storytelling in a video game is significantly different than telling a story in a movie or a television show. And that's what we're gonna go over. Overall, this video series will consist of 17 videos. This first video is gonna break down the different stories we could tell. The second video is about the medium that could match it. And then the third video is basically the basic rules video. And those 3 videos set us up for the rest of the series as we talk about adapting specific stories from The Legend of Zelda. Before we get started though, you may be asking yourself, who is this random guy on the internet to tell me how my favorite video game series of all time should be adapted? What qualifies him? That's a fair question. So, just a little bit about me. I'm an actor who's written and directed several short films, some of which have even won awards. Hold your applause, we're not exactly talking Sundance or the Toronto Film Festival here. I've read several books about writing and the industry. In fact, if you're looking into getting into screenwriting, I could not recommend enough The Screenwriter's Bible. They're not even paying me to say that. Free endorsement! What else did you want me to say about the product? I have a degree in both theater and radio and television. Okay, so this isn't my actual diploma. I couldn't find my actual diploma, so this is just a D&D sheet. But let's pretend this is my actual diploma. Oh, certification. So I've studied film. I mean, I've literally taken tests on plot structure. Again, just a D&D sheet. If I couldn't find my diploma, did you really think I was gonna find some random old test from college? Oh, hey, look, my diploma. I should probably frame this. Look, the point that I'm trying to make is not only am I a Zelda nerd, I'm also a film nerd. I'm also a get shoved in the locker nerd, but that one's not by choice. But the first two are why I'm a little bit more qualified than probably anyone you've seen do a video on this topic so far. Although I will be upfront and say that I debate myself quite a bit in these videos. Or I even give options because while there's definitely a lot of bad, unrealistic approaches you could take, there's also different ways to approach it that make a lot of sense. However, there are also lots of positions that I stand very firmly on and say why it likely has to be a certain way. But I do explain why it has to be a certain way, especially on the positions that I think are gonna piss a lot of people off. Making people angry on the internet? No, that's unheard of. But you know what? That's okay. We are all entitled to our own opinion, even if it's not based on anything else other than personal preference. So even if you disagree, even if you're foaming at the mouth and upset with something I've said, these videos are still gonna be the best you can find because, trust me, I've looked. They're all terrible. Almost as bad as some of the fan films. It's like some of these people don't even realize how important it is to film in 24 frames per second, you know? You probably don't know. It's important. Don't let that joke scare you off. While I do talk about things like act structure, I don't get overly technical about it. And when I do talk about things like inciting incident, I explain what that term is because I know not everyone is familiar with it. Also, let's face it, you guys have probably watched a lot of television and movies over the years, so there's probably already a lot of basic knowledge that you already have, even if you don't know it. Like, when I recorded my first TV show back in college, I never broke the 180 rule, even though I had no clue what the 180 rule was. I just instinctively knew that if I broke the 180 rule, it wouldn't look right. Now you're wondering what the 180 rule is, aren't ya? So it's like, if you've got a camera and you don't want to see the other like, even the camera's like not there, but like, you know it's there, even though it's, you know what? It's a camera thing. It's a technical thing. It has nothing to do with story. Let's just move on. Okay, now that we've finally gotten all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and adapt The Legend of Zelda. Now, the first thing we need to figure out is what kind of adaptation it's gonna be. In other words, do we adapt the games? Do we adapt the manga? Do we adapt the stories the games touch on but we don't really see, like the Ancient War referred to in Skyward Sword, or the Hyrulean Civil War that takes place before Ocarina of Time, or maybe the Interloper War we hear about in Twilight Princess? You know, now that I'm thinking about it, there's a lot of these games that have some ancient war from long ago that they talk about but you never actually get to see. Except for Age of Calamity. Kinda. Sorta. Not really. That game was not what they told us it was gonna be. And the final option is that we just ignore every story in the Zelda universe and start from scratch. Now let's start with that final option, but before I do, I know some of you are thinking, whoa, Kevra, we don't need to wipe away the entire timeline, you know, they can do it just like the games, we can still get brand new stories, but we don't disregard what's already happened. An adaptation requires introducing brand new audience members to a franchise. And they're not gonna do it the same way they do it in the games, where they basically have this new story at a new time, but it's also connected to all these different games. Like, if someone's first Legend of Zelda game is Twilight Princess, and they're like, wait, so who exactly is this Ganondorf guy? You can point them to Ocarina of Time, to Link to the Past, to all these different games that contain Ganondorf to show this is why he's a big deal. But you can't tell someone who may not even be a gamer that if they want to fully understand this movie or television show, they have to go back and play these games. I mean, yeah, they'll still get the gist of the story, the core concept and everything, but they won't get those big moments. As an example, I've been watching a streamer named DB Geek go back and play all the Legend of Zelda games. He started with Breath of the Wild, enjoyed it, then started going back and playing all of the older games. And as he goes back and plays all those other games, he suddenly understands some of the more significant details that were in Breath of the Wild. But once again, he's a gamer, so he can go back and play all those other games and get the full story, understand the lore. I mean, yeah, I guess they could start being a gamer because they really love the movie or TV show, or they could just read up on all the lore. But you have to admit, that doesn't sound like the best option for them. And you need those other people to make it a successful adaptation, because if it's only Zelda fans who are watching, you significantly limit your audience. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this idea is awesome. Like, I'm on your side about this. Like, if they did something where Ganondorf put on Majora's Mask to gain his power, and then all of a sudden these two powerful entities were like going back and forth trying to possess one another and their powers, I would totally be on board for that. Or if they did something like the Master Sword losing its ability to repel evil, gets broken, and then corrupted by malice, and then you have a corrupted version of Fi who you have to fight. Like, I am 100% on board for an evil Fi story. For the record, I had that idea before we saw like the sword being corrupted in the Tears of the Kingdom trailers. I don't know if it's gonna be in the game or not, but like I'm hoping it is. And if it isn't, and they want to do it like in a future game, Nintendo, you can steal that idea from me. However, while that sounds awesome to me as a Zelda fan, it's not gonna register well to someone who's never played these games and doesn't know where this lore is coming from. Like, if you didn't know that Majora's Mask almost destroyed the world by colliding the moon into it, then when you see Ganondorf find this mask and put it on, it's not gonna register the same way it would to a Zelda fan. Like, yeah, they could do a quick brief summary, but that's not gonna have the same impact. So, if we're gonna tell a completely brand new story, we have to ignore all the stories that have been told so far in the Zelda universe. Which means we're basically rebooting the universe and telling our own brand new stories and lore. But you know what? Let's stop and think about that for a second. Ocarina of Time is a favorite game among a lot of Zelda players. Now, imagine telling a brand new story that shows Ganondorf's origin, except he doesn't get into the Sacred Realm and take over Hyrule. Instead, we get a completely different story to introduce our main antagonist for the series that's vastly different than what we saw in Ocarina of Time. Like, you could create a completely brand new origin story, but if people love the original origin story so much, why not just use it? I mean, it kind of seems hard not to, because every time someone pitches me a brand new idea for a Legend of Zelda adaptation, it always just sounds like a knockoff of Ocarina of Time. And if you're gonna do a knockoff of Ocarina of Time, you might as well just adapt Ocarina of Time. And if you adapt Ocarina of Time, it seems weird to not adapt the other games, almost like you're playing favorites. And that's just gonna piss fans off, especially the ones who love other Zelda games more than Ocarina of Time. Hi, yeah, that's me, I'm that fan. Still a great game, still in my top 5 at number 5. Now, I know that one of the arguments I will get is the fact that they do this in comic book movies all the time. They'll create something completely brand new while also taking a few different stories from the comics. But with the comics, there is such a bigger history to pull from. I mean, we're not just talking about characters that have been around for 50, 60, maybe even 70 years, but they also have new stories come out consistently with new issues out every single month. The Legend of Zelda doesn't have that advantage. It only has 19 games. And out of those 19 games, you know, not all of them even have that much of a story. I mean, the first game is pretty much just a paragraph and then the rest is gameplay. So if you combine a few games to make a story, you're making this small goldmine of material even smaller. Like, let's just say that we're gonna do a story that's like Ocarina of Time, but instead of being unconscious for 7 years, Link is actually trapped in the Twilight Realm for 7 years. Midna teaches him how to create the Master Sword, and this is how he defeats Ganondorf when he finally goes back. Like, that could be really awesome, but at the same time, after you make your season or movie or whatever it was, it just seems like you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Like, this isn't gonna be a big franchise, this is gonna be a few movies or a few seasons and then you're done. I mean, I guess once you hit that point of like, there's not a lot of good material to pull from the games anymore, I guess you could just create completely new material with like new villains and lands and stuff. Or you could just build a story around like the lesser moments of the franchise, I guess. I mean, don't get me wrong, I actually do really like this idea and think there could be some really cool stories that come from it, but I just don't think it has the longevity. So for those reasons, we're gonna say that may not be the best approach. A fun concept to explore, but also really difficult to pull off. Okay, so the next idea I wanna talk about is adapting the manga. Now, I know a lot of people love the manga, but there's also a lot of people who don't like them. So it's hard to make a solid argument for adapting the manga when it seems like there's already a divide on them. However, even if everybody loved them, follow me here, it's already an adaptation based on the video game. So if you're adapting the manga, what you're essentially doing is doing an adaptation of an adaptation. I mean, it's already been adapted once, so you're just taking the adaptation and adapting that, and I don't know why you would do that when you could just take the video game, which is what the manga was based on. It just doesn't make sense to do that. You know, it's great if you can steal a few ideas from it, but other than that... So the other option that I really liked was taking those stories that we've heard about in the games, but have never actually gotten to see, and fleshing them out through an adaptation. In other words, you adapt the ancient war story where Hylia is on the surface world and goes to war with Demise. Or you do an origin story based on how Majora's Mask and the Fierce Deity Mask were created. Or you could even do the story where Ganondorf escapes the Sacred Realm, takes over Hyrule, and because there's no Link, the gods flood Hyrule to protect them from Ganon. It's a compromise between doing something completely new, but still staying very faithful to the canon because you're doing stories within the canon. And the plus side is you can't cause nerd rage from ruining somebody's childhood because you're not touching the game stories, you're just filling in the gaps. Also, if you took this route, I guarantee it would have to be animation. The other options could go either way, but this particular one definitely has a lower budget vibe to it. I just don't see a studio putting a lot of money into a live action version that doesn't have the main characters from the games. Like, these aren't Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf stories, they're basically just lore stories, and you can't build a big franchise off of it because they're not really connected. I mean, you can't do the Ancient War and then have it flow into something like the Interloper War. Like, these little stories aren't connected. Like, yeah, they're all in the same universe, but you can't build a movie franchise off of it, and it would be really weird to do an anthology TV show where like every single season is a different story, but all of the stories are from like a different video game that has all the main lore inside of it. Like, an anthology TV show is a hard sell in general, but this has some extra layers that make it even a harder sell. And let's face it, these would basically be spin-off stories geared towards the Zelda fans. And that's gonna be a big problem because a lot of these stories tie in so closely to the game. In fact, a lot of them lead into different aspects of different games. I mean, imagine how the Ancient War story would end. You got people getting lifted up into the sky, you got Demise sealed but not destroyed, and you got Hylia reincarnating herself, and likely the foreshadowing that one day a hero is going to come back and permanently destroy Demise. It's gonna be awesome for Zelda fans, but suck for the general audience. Because once again, even if the general audience doesn't need to play the games to understand the story, there's gonna be so many references and payoffs specifically for the fans that it's just not gonna register as well to someone who's never played a Zelda game. And for that reason, I don't think that this is the best approach. Although I really do like it, so I'm gonna put a smiley face next to it. Ah, look how happy he is. I like the smiley face. Finally, there's the games themselves. It's what the fans love. It's why you clicked on this video, because you love these games, and not just for the gameplay, but also because you love these stories. I mean, I think the fan base will show up to see a movie or TV show, even if it's not based on the games, even if it's a completely brand new plot. But at the same time, I think the Zelda community would be so much more excited if the adaptation was based on a story that they already know and love. Like, as cool as it would be to see a brand new Zelda story, I just don't think there's gonna be as much hype if they make an announcement like, we're gonna do Legend of Zelda, Flute of the Forest, or The Legend of Zelda, Gararian's Curse. Because you don't have an attachment to that flute, and you don't know who or what a Gararian is. It's just a word I made up. I think people would be much more excited if they announced that they were doing The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker, and you were gonna see Link sailing around the Great Sea as he learns what happened to Hyrule. Or the excitement of hearing that they're gonna do The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, and that you're gonna see Link turn into a wolf, meet Midna, and go to the Twilight Realm. Or you hear that they're finally gonna adapt The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and you're gonna see Link getting trapped in the Sacred Realm for 7 years as Ganondorf takes over Hyrule. And for the people who have never played a Zelda game before, they get to be introduced to the same stories that we the fans fell in love with. So that's exactly what this series is gonna focus on. Sorry, Mr. Smiley Face. Now that's not to say that this is my favorite option. Again, I love the idea of making brand new stories within the current timeline. I love the idea of adapting stories that we've never actually seen but have heard of, like all those ancient war stories. But those don't translate well when you're trying to introduce a brand new audience to a franchise they know nothing about. You have to do origin stories. So you either tell the stories that already exist in the games, or you wipe everything clean and tell brand new origin stories. And considering how much the Zelda fans love the stories and lore of The Legend of Zelda, it seems like the better option between these two options is sticking with what we already have. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that the other options aren't viable at all, so don't be too worried if your favorite option wasn't picked, because I'm still going to talk about them a little bit more in the next couple of videos, and I kind of plan on doing a separate series on each of those options later on, because there is still so much potential there. But for this series, we will be focusing on adapting the games, because if those adaptations are successful and you can expand the Zelda fandom outside of just the gamers, then you can branch out and do more types of adaptations. Just like how there's a bunch of Batman fans out there who have never even read a comic book. Or how there's a bunch of Harry Potter fans out there who, haven't read a normal book. Now, as far as which stories are going to be adapted, I have picked 5 of the Legend of Zelda games to be adapted. And just for fun, I even gave each of them a little bit of connective tissue. That way it seems like there's one massive story arc. However, before we get to those adaptations, we have 2 more videos that we need to go over specific things, and I think the next one will be the most controversial. Because we're gonna have to figure out what form these stories will take. In other words, are they going to be movies or television shows, animation or live action? And even though this series will comprise of 17 videos, I think that this next one is going to upset people the most, because everybody has their own preferences. That's why I want to go ahead and start talking about it in this video, because I have talked to a lot of Zelda fans, and this seems to be the topic that people get the most defensive about. Some of the arguments that are made are very solid, and then there are other ones that are just, they're not good. Animation is stupid. It's for little kids. Even if you really are someone who doesn't know how much blood and gore is in anime, or even if you're someone who doesn't know what hentai is, even if you're someone who only focuses on American-made stuff, you at least know what Family Guy and South Park is. Plus, sometimes I feel like the parents are the ones dragging the kids to go see the new Pixar movie, as opposed to the kid begging the parents to go see it. Timmy! I just found out they're making another Incredibles movie. Aren't you excited? Not really. You're grounded. Yeah, don't come out of this room until you've learned not to suck the joy out of things, okay? Thanks. And then there's this reason that I always hear. It has to be animation, otherwise it wouldn't look the same. None of these look the same. Whatever you're smoking, pass it to the left because you have had enough. And the funny part is usually people follow that up with, and that's why it should be anime. So in order to make sure that it looks perfectly right, we need the Zelda franchise, which has predominantly been in 3D, at least the home console games, since 1997. We need to make sure that it goes into a medium that's stereotypically 2D. That's the most logical thing in your mind. That's okay. Okay. Alright, now I'm gonna go ahead and state the obvious. Yes, I do have my own personal preferences just like everyone does, but I still enjoy just about everything. Movies, television, independent films, blockbusters, live action, all kinds of animation, except for claymation. Not a big fan of claymation. In fact, stop motion in general, I'm just not really a big fan of. But that's the one thing I don't like. So I didn't just pick the 2 things that I like the most and say that's what the Zelda adaptation should be. To be honest, one of the big reasons that I'm even doing this YouTube series is because for years, I thought it should be a particular way until I realized it should actually be something different. But despite that, I know that I'm still probably gonna get comments that say, oh, whatever, it's just personal bias. Even though this is not the only video game that I would like to see adapted. Earthbound might be my favorite game of all time, and I think it should be the exact opposite of what I'm about to propose for The Legend of Zelda. We are taking a practical approach by looking at it from a studio perspective, Nintendo's perspective, and a story perspective. But honestly guys, the whole debate over animation versus live action is barely relevant for these videos. Like, I only include it because it helps determine whether or not it should be a movie or a television show, and those two are very different. Like, doing a 2-hour story for a movie or a 10-episode series is extremely different. But there is no big difference between animation and live action when you're telling a story. So, do you have a Zelda script for me to read yet? Yes, sir, I do. I actually just sent it to you. All right, that's what I like to hear. Let's see if yep, there it is. All right. The Legend of Zelda live action adaptation. What the hell is this? The script that you wanted? Oh, don't worry, that subtitle is just a placeholder because I don't know what to call it yet. But we're doing animation. Oh, cool. So yeah, I need you to rewrite it. Why? Because it's supposed to be animation. So instead of filming it, just animate it. But this is live action. Right. Again, as a funny placeholder, because I didn't have a real title for it. Yeah, but this says live action on it. Okay, look, do you want a good script with well-written characters? Yeah. Do you want those characters to have goals and conflicts? Yeah. How about some sort of incident that incites a journey that will eventually lead to some sort of resolution? Yes! Yeah, that's all right there. But this says live action. Okay, you know what? Give me 10 seconds. Sent. The Legend of Zelda an animation adaptation. This is perfect! It is literally the exact same script. But this one says animation on it. It's so much better. Yeah. That was the only thing I changed. I'm gonna go read this. I like animation so much more. It's already better. Okay, so that's a slight oversimplification, but at the same time, not really. Because while you can argue that different studios tackle different types of material, that doesn't mean that they can't do it. But if you disagree, let me know in the comments below what you can do in live action or animation that you can't do in the other one. I don't think anyone is gonna have a valid answer, but you can go ahead and try. So even if you're a firm believer that it should be live action or that it should be animation, honestly, that does not matter. Because the focus of these videos is how to adapt their stories into a screen adaptation. Like the way that I'm gonna talk about the adaptation, it could honestly apply to either. And I actually think that they should do both, but that's a bigger topic that I'm gonna save until the end of the next video. So yeah, don't let the live action versus animation debate really throw you, because that doesn't matter. What does matter is movies versus television, and those are two very different things. So if you are hung up on one or the other, it might be a little bit harder for you to hear how we're gonna adapt these game stories into a screenplay format. But that's a discussion for next time. If you like this video, give it a like. If you disagreed with anything I said, let me know specifically what in the comments below and why. And most importantly, if you want to continue to go on this how to adapt the Legend of Zelda journey, make sure you subscribe. Until next time, I'll catch you later.